And it isn't so much that we couldn't do it, but we don't do it. But this last go-around, we passed a resolution, and tragically, the resolution to go into Iraq was a resolution that said we had to do it for national security, based on all the lies that we were told, of course. But it also, tragically, was to enforce UN resolutions. That was the reason that we were given the president this authority to go to war if he wanted to. If he didn't want to, he didn't have to. But national sovereignty, and I don't need to tell anybody in this audience about it, is so important. That is why every single year I introduce the bill to get us out of the United Nations. Another thing that young people like to hear about is personal liberty, personal choices, personal responsibility. And some would say, yes, they want license and they want to do whatever they want. But no, they were willing very often to accept the principle of self-reliance. Because I tell them, don't come to me if you want student loans. Come to me if you want to get rid of your income tax and get out of Social Security. And they would like that. They understood this. They want to assume their responsibility for themselves. And that should encourage all of us that they're thinking in these terms. But they do like the ideas of personal liberty, making personal choices. And there was always a good response when I told them, look, you can make personal choices and you can make bad choices. You can decide what you're going to put into your mind and put into your body and put into your soul. But if you make mistakes, you can't go crawling to the government and have them take care of you if you mess up your own life. And this was well received. You know, for some reason, we as a nation have been pretty well conditioned to allow intellectual freedom. We're allowed to read and have First Amendment rights, even though they're under attack all the time. And yet we recognize that our religious belief in dealing with what we believe is good for our soul is generally accepted. But for some reason, in the last 50, 60, 70 years, we have assumed that none of us are smart enough to know what to put into our bodies. And yet it's really the same. Why should the government have to give us permission when to take vitamins and take nutritional products and make these choices? Oh, yeah, you might make a mistake, and that's why we need the FDA to tell you exactly what to do and when. Well, then they also tell you when you have to get your shots and what to do, how many immunizations that you have to have. Which reminds me of a very good friend that we lost a few years back, and that is when I made that decision to run in 1974, the person I called was Larry McDonald, a great American. And I told Larry I was thinking about running for Congress and what advice he could give me. His advice, I remember, was, run in the party where you think you can win, because he realized the parties were irrelevant. It was just to see where you could be the most successful. At the time, of course, I was doing that more as a lark. I didn't believe I would end up being in the Congress with him that we did. But I remember in 1976, must have been the first year I was there, we had a vote, and I bet you some of you remember this. There was this flu scare. And the federal government, we have to give everybody a flu shot. So they appropriated these huge amounts of money to promote these flu shots for everybody. And there were 2 no votes against that. And there were 2 doctors that voted against it. 2 doctor no's then. But that one, we were vindicated on that because there wasn't too many years later. Not only did they waste the money, but a lot of people got sick. More people died from the shots than they did if they had gotten the flu. So that's what we don't need is mandatory medical care from the federal government. Just as now, what are they mandating? And it is mental health testing for every one of our kids in school. And there's 10 on these test programs already. They're getting about 10%. They're putting on psychotropic drugs because they don't want any young kid to fall through the track, and we have to make sure that they don't have a hidden mental health disease. These are the kind of things that are just an outrage. And these are also the kind of things that young people know about and that like to assume their responsibility for themselves. So whether it's foreign policy or personal liberty or economic issues, I believe and I am absolutely convinced we're on the right track on that. I was never convinced during the campaign that I'd be the right candidate to rally the troops. But I know one thing, and I'm convinced absolutely that our message of freedom is correct. Freedom does bring people together. The opposite divides people. When a country is going bankrupt and everything is run by the special interest, it becomes very divisive. That's why the parties fight over everything. Everybody's fighting, not so much that they have a different philosophy, but they're fighting over which special interest group is going to protect and which one has the power. And this is where we are today. We're fighting over a dwindling, shrinking pie. And this was predictable. I mean, we knew this was coming. Today, we're in the midst of a financial crisis. This is very, very serious. And we have so many proposals to do what? To spend more money, run up more debt, print more money, and write more regulations. How did we get into this mess? We printed too much money, we spent too much money, we had too much debt, we had too many regulations. And they think that's a solution. The solution, of course, is if we just followed the Constitution, had limited government, and work our way out of it. So some on the news programs now, I do get, and this I think is a benefit, I get a lot more calls now just to talk about economic policy, and they say, well, what'd you do? Would you do nothing? Well, the truth is they should be doing practically nothing. It wouldn't be a bad idea. It would be a lot better than doing a lot of harm. You know, first, do no harm. But you don't have to say do nothing. What we could do is have a government do what they're supposed to do. How about having sound money? They're not supposed to be the counterfeiters of the world. They're supposed to protect the value of the currency. Now, they always want regulation. I said, all right, let's have regulation. Let's regulate the Federal Reserve Board, and then let's regulate the President's Working Group on Financial Markets, and let's regulate the Exchange Stabilization Fund. Let's regulate the government regulator. That's the type of gun control I like, too. Yeah, I like to control the guns, but I'd like to take the guns away from all the government bureaucrats. The 80,000 that are patrolling our streets today. So there are a lot of things. We can lower taxes and we can protect contracts. Today, this mischief that they're involved with are actually violating contracts. They're not honoring contracts, and of course the money issue is a contract. But what we need to do is get the government out of the business of allocating resources, allocating capital. That is what is the problem with inflation. When the Federal Reserve increases the money supply, they artificially lower the interest rates, pretending that there's a lot of savings. We have zero savings, but the businessman and the consumer says, well, there's a lot of savings out there, so therefore this is the time to buy and invest. But at the same time, what we're doing is we're building up debt, and we build up malinvestment, and we keep building up the bubbles, and the bubbles can start bursting, but just think of how many times, especially Alan Greenspan, over all those years would paper over any hint of a correction. The market wants to correct the mistakes. The government always wants to paper them over and pretend that you can have a new economic era, which they've talked about for so long, and it never comes about. So they keep papering over, but they've gotten away with it for so long that the bubble is so big right now, it is coming to an end. So it is the bankruptcy of this country that we're dealing with. We're not dealing with a financial crisis on Wall Street. And this means there is an economic crisis not only here, but it's worldwide, because the dollar is the reserve currency of the world. It is different than any before. I think this is the biggest bubble in